I've been working on some level design tools for Unity, and this is the first time I've kind of shown them off, so I just want to go through that. So this talk is going to be a little bit about the background to why I've developed these level design tools, as opposed to what's available in Unity already. It's going to be a brief demo of the tools I've developed, and then I'm going to show some showcase levels that some level designers I know have been working on. So, as a bit of background, I've been working as a game developer in Unity for about 4 or 5 years, and quite often I've needed to actually develop level blockouts in Unity for different sorts of games like FPSs and various shooters. And I've been frustrated by what's actually available in Unity to do this. You've kind of got two approaches. You've got box modelling, where you're just placing cuboids or cylinders, and you've got mesh tools, whether that's external, whether that's using mesh tools that are built into Unity. Both of which I found quite frustrating to use, but I'll cover that in the next slides. So I spent the last 9 months since December developing my own tool set to try and cover some of these problems. So the trouble with box modelling is that it's really slow to build anything in. If you want to build a wall, you end up just placing a cube. Then if you want to have a door in it, you have to move that cube up, you have to put in 2 more cubes for each side, and if you want windows, you have to kind of repeat this procedure, and it's really, really slow. It's also not particularly intuitive, because to resize one of these walls, you have to use a little scale widget, which works with scale rather than size, which is completely different. It's also bad for texturing, because when you rescale these, the UVs won't change. And it also results in lots of unnecessary draw calls, because all these different pieces have got hidden geometry and their own calls. The other approach that a lot of people take at the moment is to use mesh tools. And while mesh tools do help the problem in some ways, they're also still quite slow to use. They require the people designing the levels to actually be artists and to be aware of how meshes work and good topology and things like that. It's also not a spatial approach. So what I mean by that is you end up kind of building your levels like you're building everything out of cardboard walls, everything's paper thin. So to build this room, you'd kind of be stringing along some polygons, and it's not a particularly intuitive way to build spaces. Yeah, and it's also quite difficult if you're trying to edit what you've actually got. If you want to move a window to a completely different wall, it's not something that's very easy to do with mesh approaches, because that window is fundamentally built into that wall geometry. So the technique I've been looking at to address this is something called constructive solid geometry, which probably more people will be aware of as BSP, which basically works by making your entire level based out of small primitive shapes, so simple shapes which, when combined by adding and subtracting, you get quite a complicated level. So on the left here we've got a sort of tree structure of a bunch of cubes, spheres and cylinders, making quite an interesting complex shape at the top. And what's really good about CSG is it means each of these primitive objects is a spatial representation. So if you want to build this room, you'd put down a block to represent sort of outer shell of the room, then you'd duplicate it as a smaller block to subtract, and then you've got this space, and then you could subtract a doorway and windows. And then if you want to move a window, for instance, you're just moving a subtractive block, and the CSG just takes care of everything. So you're not worried about topology, and it also means that it's far easier to iterate. You're not worrying about the restrictions of having to deal with changing meshes. And yeah, it's just much more intuitive for people that aren't artists to be able to build playable spaces and to focus on what's fun rather than what's necessarily attractive looking. So this is kind of what I've been developing. So This is the tool set, which is called Sabre CSG. So I'm just going to move on to a quick demo. Okay, so I'll start with a simple scene, and first of all I do is I create a new CSG object. And this creates a brush, and it also pulls in all the relevant things. So there's a toolbar at the bottom and the top. You will also see it's created a CSG model with a brush underneath it. And there's various modes to Sabre CSG. The main mode is this sort of resize mode, which allows you to manipulate the brush. So I can move it about, I can resize it as well, I can rotate it. And I can build it into an actual piece of geometry. And using this technique, I can place a bunch of brushes and then build quite a complicated level out. So I'll just resize this into a floor piece, and then I can duplicate that and make a wall here. And then I can duplicate that again and change it to a subtraction and build that, and you end up with this quite complex shape that's just made up of a couple of brushes. And there's various modes to this. So you've got the normal resize mode, which just lets you manipulate the positions and sizes and orientation. There's also a vertex mode, so I can go into one of these meshes and I can actually just start manipulating the edges, the points. There's a face mode, which allows you to change the surfaces. So I can go onto the build geometry, I can select some faces, and I can change that to an orange texture. And that's just updated both the source geometry and also the final geometry at the same time. And then I can also do other things, so I can move them about. I can rotate them, flip them, scale them. And then there's also a clip tool. So what this allows you to do is, I can just pick a brush, I'm just going to make a new one. And you can actually cut bits of this brush off it. So if you're wanting to create sort of beveled edges or something like that, and then that's just creating a sort of bevel there. I can sort of repeat that process. There's kind of two different ways of working. You can work in this 3D view. You can also work in a more sort of traditional split, where you've got orthographic views at the top, the side, and you can work that way, and you can work sort of wireframe and how it all works. So I'll just move on to showing you a couple of scenes that the level designer I've been working with has been making in this talk. So this is one of the levels, which he's called Temple, which is a sort of ruined sort of sand building. And this is made up of, I think, 1,500 brushes. So this kind of gives you an idea of some of the things you can sort of build out of it. This is a mixture of additive and subtractive brushes. So all the ones which are blue are additions to the space, and all the ones which are orange are sort of subtracted these little windows, and you sort of put in some detailing. I can have a little play around in this as well.
How long did that take?
This level.
Yes.
So the level designer has been working with the tool as it's been developed So it's probably taken him about 2 weeks, but I had a conversation with him yesterday about this, and I asked him how long it would take if he was working with the tool as it is now, and he said given that he's figured out how the level should be structured, it would take him just a day of sort of pure building. But obviously there's going to be longer if you don't know what sort of level you're building. So I'm using UFPS as the character controller. This is sort of first-person view of the level. And the other level he's been working on, so this is kind of a more sort of abstract atmospheric exploration level that he's been doing. But he's got another level which is a multiplayer sort of FPS map. So I'll just show you that briefly as well. So this level is a bit more complex. I think there's 2,500 brushes that this is made out of. But he's built everything here using Sabre CSG. So he's made his own textures, and he sort of placed all the texture work and all the detailing through Sabre. And then he's looked at using Unity's lighting tools. I'll just give that a quick play as well. I mean, this kind of gives you an idea of what you can actually sort of build with the tool and the state it's at. The initial release of the tool is going to be in about 2 weeks, so I think it's at quite a good state for its initial release, but over time it's going to be sort of massively developed, and there's going to be a lot more in terms of tool set and everything. The topology and everything is going to be optimized and improved. And here's just some more sort of screenshots of these two levels. So I know it's quite a short presentation, but any questions?